So as you can see from the picture with my guacamaya on the paddleboard, I live here about 90 steps from the ocean. And I'm on the lands of the Nawa people. It's always good for all of us to take a moment to reflect on whose land originally you are on, and if they're not still there, or whether there's still remnants of people there, or still maybe thriving cultures there, giving appreciation for how they took care of the land, most likely much differently than is happening. And with the Nawa people, we still have a number of them here who speak the language, but their plight is like the plight of many indigenous people. My background, I have ancestries from Ireland in the County Kildare area. My Cherokee relation was escaped from the Trail of Tears. For those of you who don't know it, it was a forced march out of the south of the United States, southeast of the United States, in spite of the Supreme Court ruling against it. The president went ahead and did a forced march. 25% of my people died and perished, but the one of the women that escaped from it was adopted, and turns out to be a great grandmother of mine. I'm also a member of the Oglala Lakota medicine horse Tioshpaye, and I'm a maid relative and a sun dancer there. I also consider myself a member of Mother Earth, a member of the species of human beings on Mother Earth, and relative to the cosmos, a spirit that's inhabiting this body and connecting to Mother Earth. So I'd like to ask everybody to, if it's easy for you to do, to stand up and allow me to give an invocation in my language. Otunkashila, Wakantanka, na makopa, na tatewa topa, na unshimaka, ahitawayam, kela. Oyate oyasin, unchi wichalapana oichakya, no hecha wichozani washte, uniwapikelo. Oyate oyasin, champuluta, ochlamani oichakya. Ihanilako, which wanki tunkashi, kitsuli. Vishanti atawo vilake. Well, welcome to this title that as an academic is quite complex. I should have called it Huya. I don't know how many of you know my Huya joke, but when I was on Pine Ridge, the reservation in South Dakota, Bill Clinton, who was the president of the United States at the time, was actually the first president in office to make a visit to one of our Indian reservations. That's because they originally were all, and still are, classified as prisoner of war camps. But he came, and the big stage was put up, and all the Lakota people from all the different bands came to listen to him. Anyway, the joke goes on where he promises a lot of wonderful things like healthy food for the commodities and fixing the roads so the school buses don't crash, and on, you know, teaching a curriculum that is not the South Dakota state curriculum that says the first Americans were Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. And everybody, after each of the promises he makes, yells out "Huya." And at the end, when he steps off the stage, he's about to step in a big cow pie, cow dung or bullshit. And a little Indian boy comes up and says, "Oh, Mr. President, be careful, you're about to step in the Huya." So that's a joke that I often tell. And it would be a good title for this, because we're really talking about, with this academic talking about worldviews and dichotomies and precepts, is that there are two worldviews operating today. One of them isn't working. The other one has been proven sustainable over and over again. And so we've got to learn how and why the Huya is dominating. And I hope to be able to get a conversation, since there's a small group of us, with a lot of questions and a lot of suggestions about the issue that I'm going to bring up mainly is not about, well, let's just go through it. This is one of my co-author for the forthcoming book and from previous book, Dr. Darcia Narvaez, did a review recently in Psychology Today, her blog, of this book, Inflamed. I think I spelled it wrong when I put it up there. Rupa Marya and Raj Patel's book. And they make the same point that just like the human body is inflamed with cancers, and creates imbalances. And this is happening in these three systems, that the layers of ecology on the planet, the disorders of people, and the colonization. And so really that's what we're looking at. But because I believe in starting with heart, that's why I very rarely use PowerPoints, by the way. I just let Spirit guide, but I wanted to do this to get in a lot of sort of academic points for a particular population that feels that the worldview chart is a problem because it's a binary. And these are from mostly my friends, the social ecological justice people. And I wanted to help explain why there are exceptions to the problem of binaries, okay? So one way we can express the exception to those binaries is for me to get our pictures a little bit out of the way here. And what I want you to do is, this is not the binary. This is the indigenous worldview without the dominant worldview binary. And what I'd like for everyone to do is just take a few minutes to put yourself into a meditative state. This is a Spirit of Humanity forum. I'm sure most of you all are meditators. If not, just take a big, deep breath and try to get yourself into a place of really tuning in, moving into an alpha brainwave frequency or lower. But then allow your betas to still work. You can do these back and forth and in concert. And read these and allow yourself to imagine what they would look like if they were not only ideas that you might endorse already, or that your spiritual tradition endorses, or that at some place you think it's the right thing to do, but how this is not how the dominant world you live in operates. And then think about what would it take and how would it look if it did, with your imagination. And I'm going to play a flute song that was sung by the mothers on the Trail of Tears that I just mentioned. And the lullaby at night was for the children saying, but did you see the beauty all around? In spite of seeing all the horror of the forced march and all the people dying and being beaten, did you see the beauty? Did you see the animals in the clouds? Did you see the beautiful colors of the fish? Did you hear the mockingbirds? Did you see the dancing grasses? This is what the lyrics of the song are. I'm going to play that melody as you allow yourself to look at each of these indigenous worldview precepts that have been studied and scholarly put forth in ways that I could go on and on with, but that are also being lived by the few groups on reservations and on those places in the world where the cultures still rely on their worldview. All right, allow your heart to not take over. Okay, well, thank you for doing that exercise, and we'll be coming back to talking about, of course, the worldview chart quite a bit. Just so you know how I came upon this work. Uh, when I got out of the United States Marine Corps back in the Vietnam era, I had a chip on my shoulder about all the lies that I had been told, and took it out on doing adventures, wild horses. And please, if you're on, you put your mute on just in case you sneeze or something, and you can always get it back on. So I tried to be I was a firefighter at the time, and Dave Carr and I tried to be the first people to ascend in kayaks the Rio Urique River in central Mexico, a canyon that is 8,000 feet and a river that was really not charted at the time. I had a near-death experience on the river that you can, if you go on YouTube, put in the shaman's message, you can actually see all the photos and my narrative of the two trips into the canyon. The first one, where the near-death happened, and we were helped by the Rawamuri Indians to escape the canyon. And the second one, when I went back to understand the vision that I had after the near-death experience of a mountain lion that was in a cave that we were in as the water rose, with walls around us that we could not escape out of the canyon, that actually showed us a way out. And a fawn that a Tarahumara had run down. They're famous for their running, and the fawn had been run down until its feet were bleeding, and was knocked out and brought back to the village about 100 miles away. Well, they turned into the letters CAT. Concentration activated transformation is what I eventually understood it to mean, which is a form of trance-based learning, a concept of hypnosis, the sort of the other side of the coin of meditation. And it's what ceremony is for Indigenous peoples. Fawn are 4 of the worldview precepts that you'll see on the chart, in which there is the dichotomy. A dichotomy on how the dominant worldview looks at fear compared to the indigenous, how it looks at authority, how it looks at words, and how it looks at nature. So I went from the near-death experience and the vision and the changings that happened in my life, and I had a doctorate in health psychology at the time while I was working as a firefighter, and so I went back to school to study what I had experienced, and got a second doctorate in education with a cognate in Indigenous Worldview. And right out of the bat, when I graduated, I was hired as Director of Education on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I became a sun dancer. Over the 15 years that I worked on understanding my vision, I learned things like, for example, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs was not true. We know this now, and it's been admitted by people. Actually, he knew it when he was on the Blackfoot reservation for his internship. He saw that the indigenous people had it backwards to everything that he had been observing in the dominant culture. And so instead of the idea of self-realization, being at the top and seldom reached, self-actualization and self-realization was at the very beginning, at the base, when people are born and come into the world. And at the top was from community actualization to bringing that into perpetuity. And so these kinds of things became more and more obvious, and that the more I heard people talk about worldview, which is simply a mental structure that is the foundation of everything that we do. It's also, according to the Encyclopedia of Archaeology, a normative grammar for binary opposition. So it really applies to our chart in many other ways. But it really is what we tell ourselves about reality. And every time I would hear people speaking about it outside of saying that my religion is a worldview, or my culture is a worldview, or my philosophy or ideology is a worldview, which waters down the fundamental idea of it, they would talk about things relative to nature, relative to supernature, that showed again the contrast between the relatively recent dominant worldview of the past 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 years and the one that was proven sustainable for 99% of human history. So I think it's the most important thing missing from education too. And this is the Institute of Noetic Sciences saying that. And it's not a coincidence, again, that the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences was the seventh man to walk on the moon, Edgar Mitchell, who, when he looked down on Earth and he saw we're all on this one planet, had an epiphany and quit NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, and created this Institute of Noetic Sciences. And his quote is that indigenous worldview is where we need to go. But it wasn't for a few more years in my research and in my writing where I came upon someone actually who was an expert in worldviews saying that there are only two worldviews. And that was Robert Redfield out of the University of Chicago, considered to be the father of social anthropology. And his team at the University of Chicago said at first there were three worldviews. There was the Eastern one, the Western one, and the primitive one. But ultimately, he said, in spite of the continuation of the great diversity of traditions and cultures and spiritual ideas, that the Eastern one had pretty much subsumed in the worldview foundations the Western one. So by the time he died in the 50s, he said there's really only two worldviews. There is the dominant worldview, which he called the metropolitan one, and there's the mythological one, which he called the indigenous one. And he said it was that the takeover of the indigenous one, the attacking of it.
Hi there. Hello.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Please put your mics on mute, if you would, for me. And so he actually said that it was one of the great tragedies of the world that that will go to, that the greatest one in human history. So I wrote a book in 2008 called Unlearning the Language of Conquest to understand, well, why, if this is true, is there so much opposition to it? Why is it continually attacked? So I wrote Unlearning the Language of Conquest. The University of Texas published it about the deceptions that influence war, peace, civil liberties, public education, democratic ideals, environment, law, literature, film. In other words, it's in every corner of our world, and came upon scholars whose work got into the public domain easily, whereas the counters to this didn't. You can see here, these are people that are at some of the top universities, saying things like there's nothing positive in the native past. It's wrongheaded to think that there is. That civilization and centralized governments have overcome horrors of primitive life and prove that centralized government is the best way to go, etc. And these are just a handful of them. Rob Bodovsky in his amazing book, The Anthropology of Anthropology, which was endorsed by a lot of people, he says that the discipline of anthropology essentially was responsible for this, and still half of it is, I would say, or maybe more than half of it, right? For example, Diamond is very famous for his book Collapse, but if you look at it carefully and study it, you'll see many of the same kinds of things that I exposed in my book. Our new book that just came out that Darcia Narvaez has talked about, talks about the challenges that I'm talking about. Also, I've also written this is a best-selling book that that the New York Times had on the bestseller for over a year and a half, and everybody said it was like an accurate depiction of indigenous history, and it wasn't. Well, there are, of course, a few things that do make it into the media, but not long. The largest study ever done, 450 countries, 450 scientists, 50 countries, the United Nations. You might remember this from May 2019, the extinction rate report. And of course, I wrote an article called "The Media Have Missed a Crucial Message" in it, because if you read the whole report, you'll see 7 times they say where Indigenous worldview is operating and they have control of the land, this extinction rate is severely retarded or absent entirely. Okay. And so we do have more and more people challenging it. This is the book I started to mention, another one called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. The guy's a genius. He passed away recently, but he's written a powerful book showing the complexity of indigenous cultures, that support, like, for example, 13,000 years of impact in the biodiverse rainforest did nothing but increase abundance and distribution of useful species, quite differently than the last 6,000 years that we've been able to try to address environmental ideas and concepts. We've gone the opposite direction. One thing I just want to throw in here as a sort of a note, it's real important to distinguish between indigenous worldview, as I'm describing it, which is the common denominators of the great diversity of indigenous cultures around the world. And the same thing that goes, that this idea of worldview it belongs to all of us. On the other hand, place-based knowledge, or traditional ecological knowledge, as it's called, requires knowing the indigenous language, having been brought up in the culture with the ceremonies, with the land. The language is of the land. And it's really vital to preserve and support TEK and to support indigenous cultures who are fighting for land protection and sovereignty. We can't forget about that. And both that and worldview are ignored or worse. But I just want to bring up the point that a lot of people say, well, I'm not indigenous, so how can I embrace indigenous worldview or teach it or learn it? Well, you can, because we're all indigenous to this planet, and the common denominators of the great diversity of indigenous cultures that have their specific language-based and knowledge of the land that we can't have. We need to borrow from that when we can, wherever it exists, which is fewer and fewer places. But the worldview is a starting place for us to re-indigenize ourselves to place in those places where indigenous knowledge does not exist. Now, there's a lot of great minds that are saying that if we do not remember who we are and go back to our indigenous worldview, that we are doomed. I mean, that's actually in the language of people like the ones that you just saw. Okay. And I just grabbed a handful of them. There's hundreds more, and these are just ones that relate to some of that are endorsements of some of my books. And so, okay, so much for all the colonizing and the attacks from the right. There's a poem, I tried to find it for you all today, a poem I thought Geho Gibran wrote, but I can't find it in his poems, and it might not have been. I remember the poem, but not the poet, I'm sad to say, as an academic. But it went something like this. He cast derision at his foes when each man threw a stone. But when his friend in anger flung a rose, all the city heard him groan, right? So I guess I wanted that because the passion I have for this particular presentation, for putting together a PowerPoint, is that some of my best friends, social justice champions all, are dismissive of the worldview chart, of the true worldview idea, because they see it as a dangerous binary, which is totally understandable in our dominant worldview, which is considered a binary worldview, whereas indigenous is considered a non-binary worldview, right? So I understand the confusion and the irony, but there are binaries, there are dichotomies that are true. And I've written about the fallacies, the claim that this is a either or fallacy which is the one that's coming out, is I write about in a book called The Bum's Rush, one of the top radio hosts in the United States, who is, thank goodness, no longer with us with what he's been putting forth, because he really essentially, with a number of other people in the Republican Party, kept us from recognizing climate change with his fallacies. Well, fallacies, of course, the indigenous people, deceptive language didn't exist as was having the cat-fawn connection with the concept of words. So I wrote a book on this, and I know it. Also, I taught hypnosis at UC Berkeley. It's also a powerful hypnotic. You're either with us or against us. Would you be more comfortable with your hand here or here? You want to use my pen or yours to sign the contract, right? If you are in a light state of trance, you only fall for these two options, right? You can save lives with it, or you can hurt people with it. And I wrote a book on patient communication for first responders, where you can use it to save lives. So I understand the argument that it can be dangerous, but so can the emphasis on, there's many, many perspectives, right? That's why, the right to stop using critical theory in education is being proposed in 28 states right now, right? And just this week, past September 2021, it requires public school teachers to prevent multiple perspectives about the Holocaust. So this will give you sort of the other side of that coin, right? And so, this fallacy defines a false dichotomy as when you say things are mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive, okay? Well, when an indigenous worldview is used with such precepts in mind as everything is related and all opposites have a complementary duality, two of our research or two of our worldview precepts, then we can see the exploration can be done with this we're all in the same boat attitude, and that the worldview belongs to all people, right? So it's how we use the binary, but also in this world, only the crazy people would say, I am not against the bad. There are bad things in the world, and we have to be able to know what they are. The key to it is we have to be against the bad in a very harmonious way. This comes from an expert on binary thinking, because and a good friend of mine, Dr. Hilary Webb, she did her dissertation on the tribe in the Andes, for whom, like other indigenous worldviews, people, believes in the seeking of complementary dualism in apparent opposites. Okay, and so. And Carl Jung actually mentions the same thing, that there are opposites, but they ought, in a harmonious alteration, give life a rhythm. So we should try to bring them into harmony sometime. But he says, but it requires a high degree of art to achieve this rhythm. And I'm trying to explain that the art is our indigenous worldview and how it's used, right? So I want to just kind of take a break here. And I want to have you all watch this 5-minute video. And so my PowerPoint didn't allow it to be a live link. So I'm going to have to go and just copy and then go to YouTube. You guys, that way you can see how to do it. And then we'll put in, I'm going to put in, Indigenous Worldview. Here we go. Right there it is. And so let's just watch this for a moment. 5 minutes.
How we see the world determines how we act. The Western philosopher Hobbes saw humans as engaged in a war with each other over resources, making our lives solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This view of the individual fearful, working alone, in competition with others, now dominates Western philosophical tradition. In indigenous philosophy, we are all related as individuals, as part of a kinship-based community, and as part of nature, in balance with the whole. In most Western thought, society is seen as an aggregate of self-interested individuals, connected by competition with each other over limited resources, creating fear, insecurity, hopelessness, a scarcity of spirit. Indigenous societies see prosperity in nature. Resources are abundant, shared. Collaboration fosters environmental stewardship and balance with nature. In the Western worldview, nature is feared, its value based on hierarchy. Everything on Earth ranked, mineral, plant, animal, with humans at the top, dominating everything below. In the indigenous worldview, humans are an equal part of a vibrant, interconnected whole. Two worldviews, two very different economic systems. The dominant Western market economy, like its worldview, driven by an assumption of scarce resources, intensive centralized production, individuals with insatiable appetites, accumulating. By this standard, the market economy works. 40% of the Earth's resources owned by just 1% of the population. The combined wealth of the three richest individuals in the world exceeds the GDP of the poorest 47 countries. The world contains only 497 multi-billionaires, while half of its population survives on less than $2.50 a day. The indigenous economy, like its worldview, interdependent, decentralized production, extensive use of resources, promoting responsible resource management, abundance, kinship, a belief in enoughness, encourages sharing and cooperation. In the Arctic, after a successful whale hunt, Inuit kinship and reciprocal obligations ensure everyone's needs are met, fairly and equitably. Prerequisites for sustainability, the health of the economy measured by the health of the whole. Health in the market economy, measured by gross domestic product. The more we produce, consume, the better the economy. Construction of buildings, manufacturing, transportation, all considered positive production, but so is production of weapons, cigarettes. While investments like healthcare, education are considered costs, negative economic productivity. And the impact on GDP of the physical and emotional costs of warfare, or the pollution that threatens 1/3 of the world's animal species, irrelevant externalities outside the system, not even making it onto the balance sheet. An unsustainable system where scarcity of resources is a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is an alternative. Indigenous peoples' territory spans 24% of the Earth's land surface, but is home to 80% of its total biodiversity. This is not a coincidence. In indigenous cultures, balance and harmony aren't romantic notions, but millennia-old design fundamentals. Nature essential for survival, production and protection together. Economic success sustainable, creating well-being for all. First Peoples funds indigenous models and traditional practices that are
Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the slideshow. And we'll just continue from there. Everybody good? Somebody just say yes, so I know you're still with me.
Still here, and it was great. Thank you.
All right.
Yes,
Super.
thank you.
Thank you. Now let's see, play from current slide. Here we go. I'm not real good at the technology here, so I apologize. So we already did that, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So the reason Indigenous worldview can't avoid rigid binaries and as contrasted to either or is really reflected in this one story, and I just wanted to share it. Ella Deloria, Vine Deloria Jr., a famous Lakota author, and he wrote his last chapter in the book that I showed you, Unlearning the Language of Conquest, called Law, or Conquest Masquerading as Law was the name of his book, because all of the law in Canada, the United States, and Australia is based on the doctrine of discovery. But anyway, it's a story where in the early 1800s, two teenage Lakota got in a fight, got in an argument, and one of them actually stabbed and killed the other one. And so the community spent a number of days trying to decide what to do. Well, one of the indigenous worldview precepts that contrast with the dominant one is that in conflict resolution, in the dominant worldview, usually punishment or revenge is in the picture as a main aspect of the worldview, with the exceptions that are trying to change that, that come from the indigenous worldview. And that is that the idea is for conflict resolution to bring people back into community. So this is an example of that. What the decision was is that the parents of the murdered child, the killed child, decided that they would adopt the child that did the killing to make it him their replacement son. And so when they brought the boy out of the teepee, who was awaiting to know what his plight would be, and it could have been anything. It could have been alienation from the tribe, which would have been the worst thing, and it could have been perhaps capital punishment. That wasn't not on the table, but the idea of returning to community was priority, and the whole community was involved in the decision, which is another indigenous worldview precept. Well, that decision, meant that when the boy came out, the adoption ceremony took place, which was giving the boy gifts and honoring his spirit and his responsibilities for what his path would be. It's a hard thing. When I've talked to people, I used to be in the juvenile justice business. It's a hard story for people to swallow, but this is an example of that I wanted to share with you. And you can read this. The indigenous worldview emerged from a close relationship with nature, as we saw. And so we have to learn this through an experience. It's not going to be from my PowerPoint. My PowerPoint, as you're going to see, is going to be intended towards, in a few minutes, to get us into how we can have that experience. Okay, but it's just really important to remember that this distinction of nature is really key to the whole thing. Okay, I love this quote from Paul: "When we grasp fully that the best expressions of our humanity were not invented by civilization, but by cultures that preceded it, that the natural world is not only a set of constraints, but of contexts within which we can more fully realize our dreams, then we'll be on the way to a long overdue reconciliation between these opposites." So I keep referring to the opposites because opposites do exist. And it's time for us to start to recognize that we have a set of opposites and a fundamental, foundational basis for all our actions, and it's a world view. We can't be the different cultures because that's place-based knowledge, right? And we don't want to. All of our cultures are valuable, for many, many different reasons. But we can't pick and choose anymore. You know, when I say pick and choose, I'm talking about you pick up the Bible and you can see an eye for an eye, but you can also find, you know, do unto others, right? But we can't pick and choose like this anymore. We have to say, well, wait a minute. What are the parts of my culture that are based or can be based on our original nature-based worldview, which we're going to look at it. You meditated on them, right? Not hard to do, just that we don't do them. And so we're looking at preferable paths. So each of these opposing perspectives on the two sides of the worldview chart can offer an opportunity for choosing and actualizing preferable paths. And we can make these communities of practice, like Spirit of Humanity Forum does, and by remembering that this is not a chosen person phenomenon. But now here's where we get to how to change it. Notice I say, create a new story based on the non-fictional story. The non-fictional story is the story of people that have lived in nature for millennia and who realized the teachings of the trees, the teachings of the animals in ways that they then could create their own mythologies, their storylines that reflect that wisdom. But that's all experienced observation, survival, and thriving based. But now let's look at what are the stories that we're telling ourselves. That a corporation is a person, that money is free speech, that I mean, just think of all the things that we're saying. That if you do bad, you're going to go to hell. I mean, think of any of the fundamental things that motivate us to be happy. You have to have money, on and on and on and on. What is driving us is a story. And the stories are reconfirmed in every form of media and in education especially. They're reconfirmed. The hierarchy is reconfirmed. Do this and you're better than somebody else. This person's bad, this person is good, right? These are all stories that are not based on experience. They're based on colonization. Okay? They're based on the hegemony of those individuals who benefit, those few individuals that benefit. Now, why does it work? Why does it work? Before we get to that, I just thought it would be cool to say that Hillary Webb endorsed our forthcoming book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview. And wanted to thank her for it. But here's the person that is an expert on complementary dualism, looking at our book, which is the dichotomy of the two worldviews, right? As saying that this is where we should go. I think that's a pretty good argument for my social justice friends who feel this is a dangerous binary. Okay, so now what are we talking about that makes this story so powerful? What are we talking about that makes it so that we're polluting our air and our water? There's too many intelligent people to not know that this is a phenomenon of trance-based learning. This is a phenomenon of a natural thing in nature that, as you'll see, I learned from wild horses essentially while I was also learning at UC Berkeley. But this phenomenon is something that we can use to understand why we're where we are and how to transform into the things that when we cognitively recognize which is the path that's preferable, we can then, in a generous, gentle, harmonious, loving, we're all in the same boat way, we can use this trance-based learning very easily. There's a reason that all three Abrahamic religions say that hypnosis is of the devil, right? There's a reason that salesmen don't teach it. There's a reason that dictators don't teach it, right? It's because it is a powerful, powerful tool. If you do get a chance, go on YouTube and put in wild horse hypnotist and see why I say the wild horses taught me about this. If we have time, I can show it to you really briefly here. In fact, my cat Fawn Connection, there was a book written about it called Fearless Engagement of Four Arrows by Dr. Michael Fisher, who is a fearologist. That's his picture up on the left. And at a university in Canada. And fearology is a new field of study. Mahatma Gandhi was one of the few people that recognized the phenomenon of fearlessness. Socrates and others have taught us that fearlessness is foolishness. Courage is great. Everybody loves courage, but to move from courage to fearlessness is a step that we don't think about. But indigenous peoples, that's how they understand courage. You have courage, and the greatest expression of courage is generosity, to act on something. But once you take that decision, whether it's to stand up to a grizzly bear or whatever it is, once you jump off, you leave the cliff. If you're jumping into a pond, you then have a trust in the universe, regardless of the outcome. You are full tilt. So, for example, I loved it. I have my summer place on the west coast of Vancouver Island on Tokwa Indian land, and we have a number of places where you can climb up on rocks and dive into a river. It's interesting that when you go up, or somebody goes up, that's getting the courage to do it. They see it's a safe jump. It's about 30 feet down. There's no objects. The waterfalls is right next to you, pushes you gently into a safe place. But you get up there, and height is scary, and you're looking down. But they get the courage to do it. And when they keep that courage as they're going down, they're screaming, and they hit the water and they get out and they, I did it, right? And maybe they'll want to do it again, but not too many times. Maybe they won't want to do it. But then when they learn, wait a minute, let's not do the courage anymore. You got the courage now. Let's get you moved into fearlessness. Just do some imagination. All hypnosis is believing in an image when you're in a lower brainwave frequency. It's nothing you have to pay me $300 an hour for. And so now they go back up on the cliff, and it still takes courage to climb and to get up to that edge. And you still have that fear that you have to overcome with courage. But once they use that courage and they feel themselves launched, they feel themselves off the edge, something happens. They no longer have the fear. They no longer need the courage. They are trusting the universe entirely. And what happens is they see an eagle overhead. That might have been there before or not, but they see it. They feel the sensation of falling. They feel the change in the water and what happens as they go down through the water. In other words, it's your complete awareness, right? A complete awareness. So it's not a coincidence that Michael refers to the cat-fawn connection, which we're going to talk about now, as a dehypnotizing technology. I didn't like it eventually because I didn't want technology to be associated with it. But it is true. You might enjoy that. I should ask, is there anybody that has seen the wild horse video? So that means the rest of you haven't. Well, let's see if it comes out to be a good thing to show you in a minute. Let me just get rid of this darn PowerPoint so I can see your faces better. But all animals do utilize hypnosis, the phenomenon of hypnosis, okay? But like I say, only humans, one of the very few things that's unique about humans, by the way, is that it's our ability to tell hypnotizing stories. And we all love them. We love our movies, right? But our uniqueness, there is some evidence that dolphins and whales and others can share stories, but with a small group and in ways that don't, go around the world as far as we know. We can't be sure with whales, but the idea is that this is, most people agree, most psychologists agree, this is definitely a unique thing about us, that we tell ourselves stories that hypnotize, and we continue those, and with repetition that hypnotize. And fear, authority, words, and nature, which is the fawn side of the hypnosis phenomenon, are four of the worldview concepts that are different in dominant and indigenous, that are the most responsible for, or the first three are the most responsible for the hypnosis that happens. That's why most of our hypnosis happens during early childhood. I used to, when I was a health psychologist, before I switched over to education, most of the people that had problems could be traced no matter how old they were. Even they're old farts like me, I'm 75, they could be traced back to when they were 3 or 4 or 5. Fear, listen, and the reason that I wanted to show you well, let me do it. I'm going to talk about it. This is a good time to show it to you. Here we go again. Oh, what will we do without YouTube? So I'm going to put in YouTube again. And then I'm going to put in wild horse hypnotist. And then there's me. Now maybe I was hesitant in wanting to show this to you because you would laugh that was back when I had hair. That's me when I was 40, I think.
Did you know that animals listen to dominating tactics because they're scared? If you want to have a...
Okay, so there's somebody that capitalized on my work there. So I'm going to show you just a couple of little segments
that the horse is experiencing. Okay, Rich, you feel a little nervous after seeing that horse rear up and fall over like that? Just a little bit? Okay. Well, the whole idea is that that's all your critical faculty, thinking about it. And now what I want you to do is get in touch with your really innermost self, that confidence that this is a horse that's not me. You believe me when I tell you that. And if he knows it, you know that, everything's going to be fine. So what I just want you to do, I just want you to look at my finger. And as my finger goes down under your chin, I just want you to watch it. I want your eyes to close by the time it gets under your chin. Very good. And I want you to take a big breath, Rich. Big breath. And as you exhale, think relaxation, calm, peace, safety, nothing to bother. Okay? And on 3, you're going to open your eyes. You're going to have all the confidence in your world. You're going to feel real good. We're going to walk up to this horse with a lot of love and peace and harmony. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Great. Okay, we're going to...
Okay, so just a little bit of a note here. This was the host of a nationally syndicated television program, Evening Magazine, back in the days. And they had heard that I had been training a lot of wild horses for people that had captured them and couldn't do anything with them. Sometimes their halters were growing into their head and things like that, and I would be able to go up to them and fix that. So they asked if I'd bring a wild horse in. So the horse that you saw rear up and fall over had only just been brought in for this experiment. And I wasn't it wasn't supposed to involve him. I was just supposed to get on the horse's back. But he was so interested because he himself had was a horseman. He'd been around horses all his life. And I said, well, you could do this too. This is nothing no special skill that I have. You can do this, Rich. And so the reason it took such a short time for him, and you'll see how successful he is, the reason it took such a short time for him to be hypnotized is that during times of stress, people become hypersuggestible to the communication of a perceived trusted authority figure. Let me say that again for y'all. During times of fear, let's call it fear in all of its forms, all creatures, especially humans, become hypersuggestible to their communication of a perceived trusted authority figure. It's a life-saving phenomenon in the wild, right? But when authority, remember I said fear, authority, and words were the 3 things. Imagine how you're a little 6-year-old child and some big teacher comes up to you because you're not figuring out the arithmetic problem and says, Margie, you're never going to amount to anything. You can become the most successful person in the world and you're 60, 70, 80 years old and you feel worthless because of this hypnotic suggestion. This is what we're all operating on, except it's continual in our advertising, our media, our education, etc. Right? So just wanted to give you some philosophy behind this. And now you'll see how successful he is here.
Walk up to him and pet him and talk to him and everything will be fine. Okay, Solitaire, it's okay, son. Now what I'm doing now, I'm going to be using some voice tonations that are really as much for me, Rich, as they are for the horse, okay? Because now as I'm talking, and I can sing a song, all of me, why not take all? And what this is doing, this is helping me relax a little bit.
Now, this is a big animal. He could easily put his hoofs through 2 inches of plywood. Just a few weeks ago, he was kicking butt on mountain lions, and now we're saying to him, nice horsey.
Now, if I change my demeanor right now, he would rear, okay? Okay, now easy. Easy, see that? That's no demeanor. Now watch, okay? All of me, why not take all of me, good son? Mainly the disappearance of the white around the eye will let you know that he's in a more relaxed state. The neck muscles will actually lower and relax, and his head will lower. That's a sign when his eyes get about eye level with me, I know that he's in a state of relaxation and I can begin to touch him. Good boy. Okay, now, right now, he's relaxed and he trusts the vibrations that I have, Rick. That's all there is to him. Easy. I'm going to keep that in. See? Till it gets lower and lower. He's relaxed. Good. Okay, Rich, you can do it. You don't have no problem.
Wow.
Really, no problem.
You like me. I like you. I like you. Here, can you put your head on my shoulder? Can you put your head on my shoulder? Oh, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Can you put your head on my shoulder there? I knew you could. How is he? Is there whiteness I know? Am I in trouble? Now, I've been around horses most of my life, and this is the first time I've seen anything like this. This is no put-on. Don Jacobs' music can soothe the savage beast. This animal has never had anything on his back before. We're watching the very first time.
Yeah, boy. No problem. Good boy.
Watch his ears. Watch the horse's ears.
Good boy. Good boy. No problem. No problem. No problem. Good boy. There you are.
Okay, so I think I'm going to turn this off so I can see you all. I'm really missing you. So we're going to talk about fear, authority, words, the power of words, and nature. And I don't need the slides for that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I think. There we go. Yay. Now I get to see everybody. So let's just take a kind of a pause, and I'd love to just hear, since from each of you, since it looks like, wow, okay, there's only well, we'll just see how we only have a half an hour to go, and I want to let you guys leave here knowing how to use this natural phenomenon, if you don't already, to really use the worldview chart. And I want you all to send me an email, and I'm going to send you the worldview chart. And my students are using it constantly. They're putting it up on the wall, or they're having it. And when I do a class, I often will forget about it totally. And they'll say, Forrest, can we take a moment and, and look at the worldview chart to see how it's in that, how it's causing a problem or something like this. So I'll send that to you and then we'll talk about the cat fawn connection and this phenomenon of how indigenous people understood this forever. That's why we did ceremony, right? That's, we understood, nature taught us. That's how we really maximized our spirit in this body to live in harmony. Okay, now somebody started. Go ahead. Yeah, it's good to see you. Kanya, thank you for coming. You must have something to say. I hope you do. Your mute is on. All right, I'm just gonna kind of choose some names. So Rosa, Rose, there, yeah, there, okay, go ahead. Anybody? Some questions?
I have the ingrained resistance to hypnosis that I really want to get over. And so how do I do that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So yes, and like I said, all three of our Abrahamic religions are very specific. In fact, in the back of the, oh, do I have it here? Let me see. I do. In the back of my Prentice Hall book, they wouldn't let me use the word hypnosis on this book. I was working as an EMT, and we had 150% success over the success rate for citizens observed CPR. In other words, we saved lives by talking to the person, saying, you know, your blood is pumping, it's doing this, it's doing that. And people would come back to the fire station and tell us, you know, I know that your talking is what saved the life, right? And so I sent this to Norman Cousins, who was at UCLA at the time. He wrote a best-selling book called Anatomy of an Illness. Do you remember that one? And he was in the Department of Psychoneuroimmunology. And they would bring people in, and actors and actresses, and they would say, we want you to act sick, or we want you to act healthy. And then they would measure white blood cells, and people could change the white blood cells. Well, anyway, I had made a video for firefighters on how to do this. And somebody was a friend of his, showed it to him. He's the one that got the book published with Prentice Hall. He contacted me and he said, oh my God. He said, we have to hire actors and we have to teach, you know, spontaneous hypnosis. These people are in hypnosis automatically for about the first hour of trauma. After the first hour of trauma, what happens? Our old teachings, our old programs start to operate. And then that's when all hell breaks loose in one way or the other, in a bad way, right? You know, so we have this little window. Really, with the fear should be giving us all an opportunity not to fall deeper into the things that we shouldn't be doing, but it's an opportunity to do it. But anyway, at the end of it, I had to do this. Religious considerations of, and they wouldn't let me use the word hypnosis. I said religious considerations of inner mind communication, right? And I talk about how even Jesus said, or is purported to have said, I could not work my miracles where they did not believe, right? So the idea of hypnosis is about believing in an image. Einstein said, imagination is more powerful than knowledge. If I put a 2x4 on the floor and ask you to walk across it, I'll give you $5 if you do, and you had no problem. But if I raise it 1,000 feet in the air, you say, no way, not even for $1 million, right? Because the imagined possibility of falling is greater than the realization of the logic that you have that skill and you could use the $1 million or whatever, right? So what we've got to do is we got to look at all of the background noise that has made a fool out of hypnosis, from stage hypnosis and Hollywood and all of the things, the Svengali, you know, ideas, you know, and just do a little research. The first step is put in brain surgery with hypnosis, heart surgery with hypnosis, right? And all these kinds of things. All right, my friend, muchas gracias. That's the first step. Use technology. Hold on 1 minute. Hold on 1 minute. I'm so sorry. Can you? Are you finished? Are you coming back tomorrow?
I'm an EMT too, and
all right.
They call that hour the golden hour in emergency medicine. That hour of trauma, right?
Right. Except I have a doctoral student right now who just did he's doing a study on why this isn't taught. Since my book came out, that book was banned. That one I just showed you, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. This is 1980, 2008, I think, did a review of it, and a very powerful MD, PhD guy with a lot of power at Prentice Hall said this should be used only by licensed medical physicians, not by first responders. That licensed physicians who are certified by the American Association of Hypnosis Exam, which I was a member of because I taught at UC Berkeley, right, for MFCC licensure. I taught hypnosis, right? But the book was taken off the market. Years later, Jones and Bartlett contacted me and they say, we want to republish it. And I was overjoyed because I had gotten hundreds of letters of saving lives. Jones and Bartlett, I rewrote it. They said, all we want from it is we want you to give case studies of how each of the things that you talk about, from burns, I mean, I've got pictures of burn victims in here that I was when I did my internship. Well, I don't know if it'll come through, but unbelievable, right? Anyway, so I do all the work, send it off. They say the Association of Orthopedic Surgeons is our partner in publishing this book, and they don't want you to say this, and this. And they watered it down so much. I said, well, what the hell? Well, the irony there was there was a book called Care and Transportation of the Sick and Injured that was published by the Association of Orthopedic Surgeons. And on page Roman numeral 8, when I was a young firefighter, that's what inspired me. It says, be careful what you say at the scene of an emergency. Words can become fixed in the patient's mind and cause untold harm. So I told Jones and Bartlett, I said, for Christ's sake, I said, this is the publisher that inspired me to write the original book. And now they don't want me to say these things. Well, it was a new editor. So I said, forget about it. I'm not publishing it. So the book is I think a copy, you could buy a copy for $800, but I'm just sending everybody the free manuscript, and it's just so sad, right? So just get over it. Get over the barriers by doing the hypnosis, but because you can't do it with willful determination. That's the key to it, right? You can't just say, oh, I got the logic. I see it's illogic to jump in this pool, because I'm afraid of water. It's illogical because it's only 3 feet deep. I can stand up if I want to. I mean, I have known people that were afraid to get into a bathtub because of an early childhood near drowning, right? And that afternoon, I'll get them in a samadhi tank. And then after the samadhi tank work, I'll get them in a lake that afternoon, right? So you have to, the hypnosis is too strong. Otherwise, we wouldn't be contaminating our planet and killing each other. So you can't just say, oh, that's logical, that these are the reasons I believe that. Now you got to take those reasons and say, okay, it's safe for me to change that. And the simplest way to do this, folks, get I'll use my Sundance thing, but you can use a piece of dental floss and a paper clip. But everybody's played with pendulums, a lot of you have. And all you do is just balance your elbow on the table. I'm balancing it on my knee here. And I don't know if I got it low enough where you can see this or not. But just imagine it, because remember I said imagination, when you're in a brainwave lower frequency, creates a hypnotic effect. So write down that hypnosis is now going to be a tool. It's a natural tool that you've always had, but it's now going to be a tool that you will begin using. Frame it in your own words and make always the words positive. When sports, I have a Natalie Mulhausen is the world champion fencer in Brazil. Natalie Mulhausen. She is the only person to ever win a gold medal in fencing in Brazil. She was 265th when she came to me here in Mexico. And now she's the world champion, right? And this is what we did. And so you can take and imagine it going in a circle. And what will happen is when you're in hypnosis and you're believing in it and you're not nervous or thinking critically about why or if it's going to work or not, when it starts to go and you don't freak out, stay with it. It's just because ideomotor neurons are being activated via the imagination of the phenomenon, and they're sufficient to move a weight like this, right? So now I'm going to be doing it, teaching you all. And it's going pretty strong there because I thought, wow, what if I fail? There's a little bit of fear that was there, right? It motivated me. But here's the trick. All that does is tell you that you're in that state of consciousness. You got to keep it going while you imagine this new tool blossoming in you, or however you phrase it, right? And like I say, keep the language positive. Athletes, that's why I started talking about my athletes. They learn a little bit of it, but they don't know the part about positive words. They can see, I'm in front of a sand trap and I don't want to hit the ball in the sand trap. So they could go put themselves in a light trance. You don't have to take out your pendulum. You can imagine your finger lifting, right? So you don't look so, it doesn't look so weird. And they raise it up and they know they're in a trance and they imagine and they say to themselves, I'm not going to hit the ball in the sand trap. What's going to happen? Going to go into sand trap, right? Because the imagery words are ball and sand trap. So you got to use positive imagery words, so you can say, I don't want to hit the ball. That's the problem. I will hit the ball in the fairway. Bingo. And then now you have the right kind of imagery. So you got a double task. If the pendulum stops, then you're imagining it and you're saying it, but you're not in hypnosis anymore. So that'll save you $300 an hour. Anybody else have anything to say about the worldview chart, about it not being was there anybody that came into this feeling that it was a binary and that you don't like binaries? I mean, because that was really my purpose of this particular segment of my life.
So, hi, Four Arrows. Lovely to see you again, my brother. I missed some of it. I've been on the run, kind of trying to actually keep up with you guys while I've darted through meetings and whatnot. I'd like to hear what David has to say, and I'd like to chirp in a little bit later. If I get 5 minutes to settle down, I've just come back to the hotel. So I need to pee and a few other things, and I'd like to chat with you after, if that's
all
cool.
right.
Lovely, brother. Thank you.
Go for it, David.
Yeah, Kanye, are you still there?
Well, I
I'm here, brother. I'm just trying to take a pee and settle down and have a glass of water and whatnot.
I just wanted to know what you wanted me to, what you were anticipating me to say.
Just anything about that, because I know in all of your great work, David, you have been unabashed in pointing out the binary. Have you ever gotten the negative kind of feedback that I was trying to address here, that because you're giving an either or situation, that you're wrong? I mean, has that from and I'm talking about from the colleagues that you respect?
Well, I think that, there's binaries in everything.
Yeah.
But we have to, one of my great teachers is Parker Palmer, who talked about the importance of learning how to hold the tensions between these binaries. It's how we negotiate them. It's not a question of whether we're going to have binaries or not. It's a question of how we're going to navigate our way through the binaries that present themselves.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
So, it's the same thing with worldviews or ideology or anything else. We're going to have worldviews. We're going to have ideologies. I was just thinking, some of my more recent, explorations have been in psychoanalysis, and more particularly Jacques Lacan, and the whole notion that the three registers of the psyche, one of them being the symbolic order, which I think is really what you're talking about with the worldview in some sense. That is, as Homo sapiens, our capacity to generate symbols to represent things, but symbols themselves, aren't the things in them, aren't the things in themselves. But if Lacan was correct in talking about this, the symbolic order, or what he calls the big other, it's not a matter of whether we're going to have the symbolic order or not, but We know the dominant symbolic order has been, largely the product of the power of global capitalism. The kind of correlation between the symbolic power of money and wealth that translates into political power in order to affect the kinds of hypnoses that you're talking about, whether it be Rush Limbaugh or Barack Obama or whoever, to push us in. They have the power, the access to mass communications and whatnot to do this. And
well, what I want to do is I want to show the worldview chart, because I really want to make sure, because it's so easy to get on to ideologies and psychological philosophies and theories. But this work is about, we already have all of those. There's a million of them, right? And there's a lot of different variations on it, right? When we're talking about the two worldviews, and again, using Robert Redfield's, that you don't water it down by saying everything's a worldview, Christianity is one, and this is another, and this is another, and this, we're talking about the fundamental positioning of humans in nature and in supernature, and the kinds of ways you would live if you understood the interconnectedness with nature, all right? And what we find is that when people talk about this, scholars that are not trying to make the agenda and put down the indigenous to support, like the ones I showed in the book that you have a chapter in, we look at non-hierarchy. How do we begin to live in a non-hierarchical way and not without the philosophizing? How do we get people to have a socially purposeful life? How do we bring fearless trust in the universe, come jumping off that cliff, story? How do we truly make community welfare more important than personal gain? And we could go through each one of these things, from the materialism to seeing Earth as a living, loving system, on and on and on. Parker Palmer, who's endorsed 2 of my books, says, truth is an eternal conversation conducted with passion and discipline about things that matter, and it doesn't mean that there isn't an either or. It's just that we've got to be able to have these kinds of understandings of how we have to live in a world that where time is cyclical, where seeking complementary duality is what nature does, that an emphasis on responsibilities instead of rights, seeing ceremony, each one of these things. When I presented at the College of Boston College, and Paul Freeman, I would love for you to say something on this. There was a woman there that had not seen any of this material and said something that just made my heart sore. She said, wow, how simple is that? Looking at the worldview chart, that all we've got to do is begin to, in a creative, harmonious, loving way, begin to see how and why, and these aren't the ones over here are getting us in trouble, and then recognizing ways to do this with cognitive, metacognitive worldview reflection, and then doing the concentration activated transformation, doing the meditative mindful hypnosis work. In one generation, the Misak Indians were able to do it. Now, we've got a lot, that's not an example for what we might be able to do, but Paul, jump in on this to say something about with all the work that you've done, what challenges and opportunities and ways to look at the duality of these two ideas.
4 arrows. I just want to say that Peter Barros wants to say something.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Hand.
Yeah, let me put the chart away, and I'll send it to you when you need it. Okay. Go ahead, Peter.
Oh well, I didn't mean to butt in line.
No, not at all. I just didn't see your hand up.
Could I share my screen for this?
Sure.
You have to activate that sort of thing.
I don't know if that will work or not. Can you just tell us?
Well, take more words. There's an exercise, a practice I've been doing for about 7 years with a neuroscientist of my acquaintance. And it's called neckering, after the famous Necker cube, which was an image designed by a fellow named Necker, I think. In any case, I've lost it there. Picture a wireframe drawing of a cube, and it's two-dimensional, but your brain will see it as a three-dimensional image of a cube. And you can be looking up at it, or you can be looking down at it. And because of the way that perspective is drawn, right? So can you imagine that?
Yeah, we've seen I've seen various,
Yeah.
there are various images like that.
Well, there are lots of them, but the idea of this one is it's very simple and easy to use. You can flip at will between one angle of view and the other. And this is a brain function that can be applied in a lot of different things. And I think it's relevant here.
Yeah, tell us
because-
how. I'm waiting for you to tell us how it's relevant.
Oh, good. Pretty much any word that ends in ness, like upness or downness, or insideness or outsideness, or sadness and happiness. And you can go on and on with this, but what you're doing is you're assuming an opposite brain state when you do that. So you could do the exercise for practice in making that flip, because it's a muscle we're not used to. But then you can take a situation of duality like this, like my brother is being very annoying. He's finally going to get to be the oldest now, because he has some power to tell me to move out of my house. Performing this flipping of the brain state, or neckering, I suddenly had the experience that my brother had an incredibly difficult responsibility to the family and loved me absolutely. And so I had just hung up in anger, and I called him back and said, I just want to tell you that I totally support whatever you do. I understand how difficult this is for you, and I love you. And the next time I saw him, for the first time in 70 years, he kissed me.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that with us, Peter. There are, when I wrote that book, and that was back in 1988, there were 72 dynamics that had different names. There's probably now 1,000 of them, but there are a lot of different ways that we can utilize getting into the hypnotic effect, right? And so that's, whatever works. People that are doing meditation, they're already in the hypnotic state. The only difference between the meditative state and the hypnosis is you have the intention. So as soon as your Kundalini yoga guru is giving you affirmations or imagining sending love to the world or whatever, you are now doing hypnosis, right? So the phenomenon of getting into hypnosis is really not a very difficult challenge for us all. It's doing it, it's believing in it, and it's practicing it. It's just going into the shower and on a nice cold fall or winter day in Chicago, and having a nice warm shower, and then saying, you know what, I'm going to practice hypnosis. And in a few seconds, I'm going to turn the hot water completely off. And when I feel the so-called pain of the cold water on me, I'm just going to allow myself to feel comfortable, right? And I'm going to use different kinds of words on that. Pretty soon you start to get it. We've got to start practicing this and not really fall into a trap of there being some gimmick or some particular way. Even if it works for us, you can say, hey, I'm going to use this to work for it. This is in us. This is natural, right? This doesn't require anything but believing in an image and looking at the worldview chart and saying, what situation is there? And then following it up with what's called an in vivo exposure. That means, all right, now you've got the image. You're no longer afraid of water. You're going to feel comfortable. Follow me. We're going to get in the car. I'm going to drive you to the lake, and we're going to actually practice this, right? Or if it's a fear of a dog or whatever. So I'm going to try to just stay with the fundamental ideas. There's no gimmicks, there's no tools, there's no things, all of them. And I don't mean gimmick, I mean other ways to be able to activate this. It is natural, it is natural. And now with Richard, I did hetero hypnosis because that's what people expect. So we've got to get away from the expectations and realize all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, right? And Richard and I talked about that afterwards. I could have just said, Richard, you can do this and not hypnotize him. And I said, I want you to do the hypnosis on yourself. I just didn't want to risk that because that takes practice, right? That takes practice. So who else do we have? Anybody else? We had about 2 minutes.
Since you invited me, I'm suffering from an unstable connection. Metaphors embedded. Right. So apologies if I'm freezing. I just wanted to say how grateful I am, and really, you've mentioned a couple times the power of story, and listening to you tell stories is such a valuable vehicle for me to understand the message and what you're talking about. I think in terms of the two worldviews and the seeming simplicity of, how simple is that? You said we just move towards colony instead of colony. But of course, the thing about worldview is it so infiltrates every aspect of our institutions and our own thinking and acculturation that it's not so simple. I guess my area of greatest familiarity is the institution of education, where fear, authority, and words combine to create this hegemony, right? And I, perhaps it's obvious, but I just invite you to talk a little bit about nature and its role as a counter hegemonic force.
And what you might have to say if you don't want to wait for 4 hours to come back.
Yeah, I just I just wanted to kind of finish my thought on this symbolic the symbolic order or whatever, it's our capacity to represent what we see in the world. There's a French philosopher that some of you probably know, Jean Baudrillard, who's famous for saying that the map is not the territory. And going back to Four Arrows, the indigenous worldview where words are sacred and truth is essential. It may be true that the map is not the territory, but if your map is not accurate, you're kind of screwed. If you're trying to reach your destination. If you're operating, it's the same as things really operating under false pretenses or faulty misinformation. So I think the whole notion of reconnecting, right now, in our world, there's a big fascination for identity politics and whatnot. And the question is always who are we? And we tend to link up with different tribes. But if we ask ourselves a prior question, that is, what are we? And we go back and really look at human origins and start recognizing ourselves as all members of one species, and start treating each other like that. I think therein lies, I think, a profitable pathway toward reconciliation of differences and the kind of unity that many of the indigenous prophecies are actually calling for. That we have the choice of either continuing just with the divisiveness that's sort of endemic to the dominant worldview, or we kind of get our stuff together and come together. Tragically, it may take some sort of global cataclysm to get us to wake the hell up. But I think, I'm 61 right now, and I don't foresee the necessary changes happening within my lifetime. But I think it's important to start that conversation, making sure that that conversation is a transgenerational conversation, that extends beyond our own individual lifetimes into the future. And that's what Kanye and I are working on with the Positive Universal Project / Gathering of the Tribes, to try to bring together people interested in holding that conversation, and asking ourselves, what kind of questions do we need to ask ourselves? Do we really need to start contemplating together? And moving forward, collectively as a species.
How can we join in that effort?
I'll post a couple things in the chat. I'll post a couple things in the chat. You can also join our group on Facebook. If you just Google, or not Google, if you just look David Gabbard up on Facebook, send me a friend invite. I'll get you hooked into the Positive Universal Project and Gathering of the Tribes. Gathering of the Tribes was really an initiative that Kanye started, and Kanye and I made our acquaintance through our mutual interest in a show out of the UK called Rebel Wisdom. I don't know if anybody here follows Rebel Wisdom or not. But I found several of the conversations that they've been hosting to be very interesting, and wanted to start, being a bookish academic, I wanted to translate all these online interviews that David Fuller has been having with a lot of really interesting people into book format. And David reached out to some other people who've been following to help me do the transcripts, and Kanye was one of them. Kanye and I got to know each other and sort of like, wait a minute. I came through the Positive Universal Project through my associations with Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian philosopher. And, Kanye had the Gathering of the Tribes going. And it's, in my interpretation of Žižek's notion of the Positive Universal Project, it's sort of like, wait a minute, Gathering of the Tribes is exactly that. So we joined forces, and we're working with a couple of Native American folks on Pine Ridge, and some people in Swaziland, and people in Russia and South America, to try to get this sort of like cross-cultural conversation going. One of my big heroes, great influence on me, was Ivan Illich, who started the Center for Intercultural Documentation in Cuernavaca, Mexico, back in the early 70s. And I view what we're doing as a lot of that kind of intercultural documentation, sort of carrying on Illich's legacy.
There's a whole lot more of this kind of thinking and acting going on than that first appears. And the past 2 years, I've been looking for it and overwhelmingly finding it. And to me, the whole conversation about worldview goes back to a neurological fact, which is that our perceptions and our actions are linked, are correlates.
Yeah.
And it's so absolutely correlated that they bypass thought. If something is heading for your head, deflecting it with your arm never reaches thinking. It's just part of the same neural pattern. Yeah. So this indicates to me that one very powerful place to go is into our perceptions. And that's why Four Arrows work is so valuable, because he's working with tools in which my perceptions are instantly transformed. And in that moment, not only what I'm thinking and all my assessments of everything, but my most detailed automatic behaviors are consistent with that worldview.
Right.
So, and collective behavior is really a big problem for us humans.
It is.
So basically, you don't have to pull every lever and dot every I and cross every T for humanity to pull out of this dive.
Right. Well, that's kind of why I brought
also,
up.
last thing, If it's possible, I'm saying it's already happening and well underway. So feel good
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. Oh, I know. I mean, trust me. I mean, I've been suffering writer's block for like the last 4 or 5 years, trying to think about the positive universal project that Zizek introduces. And he doesn't really say very much about it, but I just thought it was a fantastic idea. But what it would, but I was thinking about what it would look like, and it seemed a little bit arrogant for little old me to be taking on, this tremendous task of building the kind of global light culture or leading culture. And then, once I got acquainted with some of the indigenous prophecies, it's like, damn, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has already happened. This is called for, and as I started exploring these sorts of things, you're right, I found that these conversations are already sort of happening. And so the task changes from having to start it to how do we connect the various groups who are having various manifestations of this conversation, how we can connect us all.
And it's interesting how quickly we can take something new like this and create a new thing to be anxious about.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Hi, excuse me, everybody. This is Beatrice Foriero's wife. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, at last.
Hi.
Oh, great.
I'm so sorry that I wasn't around when I think he put me on the spot there for a second. I just went to let my chihuahua out and I came back and I said, is he waiting for me? Anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that it's really nice to see all of you and the work that you're doing around the world. And we really do need to raise the consciousness of the planet if there's any chance for anything. And that's all we can do is just, open our hearts to love and light and educate. Oh my gosh. Anyway, he just called me from Mexico. It appears we have a power outage everywhere in our area, which is very rare. I'm telling you, the electrical service down in Mexico is actually where we are, quite extraordinary. So that's why he was not able to get back on, because everything is down. And the only thing he was able to do was call me. So I think he was trying to tell me to let all of you know that he's trying, but if the power grid is down for whatever reason, then that's not going to happen.